Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mavens of Data. We've got Aaron Parry joining us today, ready to talk all things Power BI. Aaron, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, Enrique. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you, and yeah, super excited to talk Power BI today.
This is going to be today's agenda. I'm going to talk about these three things, and I think if you're ready, Aaron, we can just jump right into the questions.
Yeah, man, let's do it.
Let's do it. So I was actually doing some research before the show, and it looks like Power BI launched in 2015. Looks like you started using it 2016. And since then, Microsoft has been the leader. I'm sure folks have seen that, they're Gartner's Magic Quadrant for analytics and BI, and you've got, Microsoft all the way in the top right there as one of the leaders. Right now, it almost stands alone at the top. It's separated from Tableau now, I guess, Salesforce. So what do you think, Aaron, is that makes Power BI one of the most sought after tools in today's job market?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a handful of reasons, right? I think one of the kind of main reasons or top reasons is how well it integrates with the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem, right? So if you think about, a company and the tech stack that they might be using, oftentimes they are using a lot of those Microsoft tools. So its ability to integrate with things like Excel and Azure and, now the Fabric ecosystem, Teams, PowerPoint, all that kind of stuff. It really helps with adoption when it integrates so seamlessly with a lot of those other tools. It's also pretty easy to get started with, right? At least at a very basic level. It's pretty straightforward to just import a data set, drag some things onto the reporting canvas, start creating some visualizations, and that kind of stuff. So the user interface is pretty friendly, but there are a lot of advanced features, a lot of advanced DAX and kind of Power Query M functions and advanced data modeling techniques that allow it to be a very robust tool for those advanced users, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to get started with. Couple other things come to mind. One is the kind of cost or the pricing model that they use.
Yep.
So Power BI Desktop is free. You can download it for free. They don't really feature gate anything besides some of the Copilot functionality right now. So you can basically download Power BI Desktop for free and you get full access to everything, right? There's not a lot of the other competitors that have that similar model. Some of the other tools tend to be feature gated or they gate connections or something like that. So, and then once you get to the paid tier, I really do think that they price it in a very competitive way that it really helps you scale within your organization. There's a lot of different use cases that can be served or accomplished with Power BI. So, think about bigger organizations that have finance teams, marketing teams, sales, operations, safety, logistics, all of those different verticals within a company. There's different use cases for each of them, and Power BI can help develop reporting and solutions within all of those different kind of verticals within a specific industry or across industries. So I really think that there's a lot of flexibility within the tool. And there's a ton of different use cases that it can handle. So the other thing is that it's constantly, evolving, right? Sometimes this is a little bit frustrating with the monthly updates. But again, like Microsoft's product velocity when it comes to Power BI and that whole ecosystem, it really is just amazing. The amount of features that they push out each month. It is pretty amazing. So there's a bunch of reasons why it's, a pretty amazing tool. And the fact that they continue to innovate and develop that tool and really push the feature set, I think is, kind of one of the last key pieces there.
Nice. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's hard to hear, Microsoft user-friendly data in the same sentence and not think Microsoft Excel as well.
Yeah.
And now I think especially like in the past, you mentioned all these, different departments and companies and how they're leveraging Power BI for their analytics, right? But I think before, unless you had a specific or a dedicated data team, I feel like everyone was doing all of this stuff in Excel. So because, to your point, Power BI is free to access, it's easy to get up and running with, and it's really like kind of sparked the dawn of the self-service BI era. Where do you think this leaves Excel now in terms of being relevant for data analysts? Is Power BI here to replace it, or do they each kind of have their own place as different tools for different use cases. And before I let you answer, I'm actually going to send another poll just to see in the audience what tool people are using at their work. Are they sticking with Power BI? Are they sticking with Excel? Or are they using Power BI? Let's see what we've got. So what do you think, Aaron?
What do I think the result of the poll is going to be, or
what do you think in terms of Power BI replacing Excel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Excel's dead. You know, there's no no, joking. I think like in a sentence, Power BI is complementary to Excel, not a replacement. Yeah. Right. I think that kind of gets at the heart of it. For me, Excel, it's still a go-to tool for data exploration, right? A lot of times where if I get asked a question by somebody else, you know, within Maven, or I'm trying to just kind of wrap my head around something, I'm looking for that data set in a flat file to be able to manipulate that, whether it's a CSV or actually in Excel. You know, I'm still using that for quick data exploration, a quick analysis, or some sort of maybe ad hoc report, right? I really think that Excel it's amazing for like quick, complex calculations. One of the pieces, you know, for folks that are new to Power BI that can be really challenging to learn is this whole row and filter context fundamental, right? Where you need to understand how a number is being calculated based on the filter context, you know, within the visual, within the report page, within the measure. You know, there's a bunch of different contexts there. With Excel, you could say, hey, I want this cell to equal this cell, you know, or this cell plus this cell to equal this cell. So, you know, it becomes a little bit more tangible or easier to kind of develop those complex calculations. Just the pivot table functionality for quick analyses, one-off reports, it just makes it so simple and also very tangible to see the output of what you're doing and what you're working with. So one of the things, I actually did a meme post on LinkedIn about this probably a couple of weeks ago now. But the idea was like, you know, why isn't there an export to Tableau, right, option within reports? And again, I'm not picking on Tableau, right? I very well could have said, why isn't there an export to Power BI option? But the point is, it's like most users, most people, when they want to kind of dig into the data and feel like they can manipulate it and really work with it, they want to do that in a flat file. They're looking for Excel or a CSV or something like that to kind of be able to manipulate the data. So no, I don't think Excel is going anywhere at all. I think they do have their own use cases. Power BI, for me, it's really built for transforming, modeling, visualizing large data sets, right? And you can do that in a way where it really supports dynamic reporting. And it also, Power BI, one of the things that it does really well within the whole ecosystem is it allows you to share all of that stuff at scale within or external to your organization, right? There's a lot of options there to really kind of distribute your reports that you're working on, collaborate with other teammates. So the Power BI team is continuing to kind of shrink the differences between the tools, right? I know that you're well aware of this from, you know, your background in Excel, using Excel and Power BI as well. They have the same data modeling capabilities. They have the same Power Query capabilities. You can write DAX in both Excel and in Power BI. Some of the newer, you know, features is you can publish a model to Power BI service and connect to that model in Excel. You can connect to that model in Power BI. And now you have kind of like a trusted, you know, golden data set or a single source of truth, however you want to name it, that you can use the BI tool that you're comfortable in to connect to that data model and then visualize the data, perform some sort of analysis. So again, I think part of it is kind of comfort level. I think some of it is the ultimate end goal of what you're trying to do with that data. If it's really about large scale distribution and that kind of stuff, Power BI really shines there. So yeah, I think that they're more similar than dissimilar at this point. And I think that they're still continuing to develop a lot of features for Excel, right? We were just talking about this, the other day about like the Python, integration and stuff with Excel. Like that's exciting, right? That's opening up new doors and opportunities for other types of analyses. So they're still doing a lot in Excel. So it's not like they're leaving it, to the side, so to speak, and really pushing everything just into like Fabric and Power BI, and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Right. And not for nothing. It's like, I think it's, I was looking at the stat, I forget the number of like billions of people, but I think it was like 1 in 8 people in the world, right, use Excel daily. 1 in 8. It's like at that scale, like that number of people, I don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah, and it looks like the people in the audience agree. Looks like 40% say both. It depends on the situation. We do have 44% that mostly use Excel, though. So I know, Aaron, in the past, you personally started working with Excel as a marketing analyst early in your career, and now you mostly rely on Power BI, not just as an instructor, but as a chief customer officer here at Maven. So what do you think are some of the unique advantages that Power BI offers, especially at a small, rapidly growing company like ours, that maybe folks in the audience can learn from to start leveraging it themselves?
Yeah, so I'll start with the trying to address like that 44 or 40% of people that are just using Excel at work. Like when I started off using Excel as a marketing analyst, it's because all of the clients that we were working with, that's the tool that they wanted to use. Right. So it was partly driven by, hey, this is very accessible. It's intuitive. It's easy or relatively easy to develop reports there. And it also aligned with the other companies that we were working with, how they wanted to receive reports and data. So I think that's one really important piece of context when you start talking about like this tool versus that tool. A lot of them do very similar things. Part of the decision process is like what's best for your organization, and then how does that help support the business that you're trying to go out there and either support or win, or something like that. So so Excel is awesome, right? I know that's not the point of this Power BI discussion, but Excel really is awesome. So part of the evolution kind of from Excel to Power BI, I actually went from using Excel and SQL together to using Tableau and SQL together, and then started to use SQL and Power BI together. And some of the things that I love about Power BI is the flexibility that it allows. So it is like you had kind of started off talking about, it is a fully kind of like self-service BI solution. So as an analyst, I can say, hey, I've got all of this data in my SQL database, and I know that I need to create a relational model with that. And instead of creating a bunch of joins and stuff like that, you can use a tool like Power BI to create a data model, and then create your aggregations based on that data model. So Power BI, really allows us, here at Maven and for all the reporting that we're doing to really, leverage a lot of that flexibility. It serves as a single source of truth. So we've got different folks from different teams, whether they're on the customer success team or like a revenue and growth team or the B2B, sales team. We're all able to kind of plug into the same data sets and use that as a single source of truth. The other piece that I really like, and that's pretty easy to set up actually, is some automation. So we have reports set up. They all refresh in Power BI service. And, a couple of times a day, you can go in there and check out, data that's fresh within the last, 3 to 4 hours. So from, running and operating a business, it makes a lot of sense to kind of have those reports automated. So that's a great feature, that I love with Power BI. I think one of the last things that's really interesting too is it helps promote a data-driven culture. And it's a really kind of like buzz term, right? Oh, we need to be data-driven. We need to do this. So I was trying to think of a couple of examples of what I meant like that, or what I mean by that. And the first one that came to mind was when our first Python instructor, Chris Brule, came on board. I remember being part of his onboarding. And one of the first things that I did is I brought up our Power BI reporting in the service. started kind of showing him some of the key metrics and KPIs and stuff. And it was such a tangible way to show him, like, this is what you're trying to impact. This is what we're looking at. And, Chris's response was, he was kind of blown away by it. He was like, I've been at, a few different companies, and this is the first time at an onboarding, I'm staring here, kind of looking at data and, having that conversation. So I love that aspect of it. And then one of our engineers actually reached out recently too. They were looking for a dashboard to help better understand their costs. And, it was pretty limited from the UI options that they had. So, worked with him, pulled in some data, and, was able to kind of build out a cost dashboard that the engineering and dev team could use to understand, implications of what they were doing. So I think what being a data-driven culture at Maven enables is for folks to, either reach out with those types of questions or requests because they know that it's something that we can do. And it helps with that onboarding, process as well. So I think those are kind of the main reasons, why Power BI has been, certainly key for a lot of what we do here.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that single source of truth aspect. It's funny, we had a lunch and learn session with one of our B2B clients. I think it was last week, and we were talking about dashboards, right? Which is another hot topic, something that's very relevant to Power BI. When they were asking, say that I have this data, but we have different stakeholders that need different things from it. Do we build a single dashboard for all of them, or do we have to build separate dashboards for each? Mm-hmm. And the question the answer, I guess, has many nuances. Ideally, you want a different dashboard to address each purpose. But the best thing about that single source of truth that you're talking about is that you don't have to go through this whole workflow for every single one of these dashboards, right? You can create a single backend for your company, and it just makes the development of the individual reports that much faster and that much easier. So I think that is one of the unique advantages that Power BI has versus in Excel. Granted, you still have data modeling capabilities, and I know we've had folks in the chat mention that, but it feels like every new project starts from scratch versus Power BI. You can kind of develop this entire structure and then kind of leverage that to make your job easier going forward. So I love that. And, just kind of getting into that topic, can you maybe tell us a little bit more? I know you mentioned those KPIs with Chris Rule. What are some of the other solutions that you've built in Power BI to get folks a clearer idea of exactly what it's capable of?
Yeah, for sure. So, thinking about that, there's kind of different points in my career where I was focused on different things. So as a marketing analyst, we did a lot of things that were marketing focused, obviously. So building out reports where, we're looking at, combining campaign data from, 15 different sources, covering things from, paid search, SEO, different types of display media, affiliate programs, email campaigns, right? You've got all these different data sources that you need to kind of bring together and paint this picture, for whoever the stakeholder is, the CMO, something like that, where it's like, these are the marketing dollars that I'm spending. What am I getting from them? Like, what is that translating into? So, as a marketing analyst, there was, kind of marketing campaign reporting that we were doing, checkout funnel analysis. So kind of like e-com specific, cart or checkout funnel analysis. We built some Power BI dashboards to help enable that. Worked with a pharmaceutical company to help them understand how their marketing was driving a lead gen program. And then there was also an HCP, a healthcare provider aspect to that as well, that was specific to the different providers. And then there was a really fun one. I was working with a college in Illinois, and they were looking to drive awareness. So it was like a social media campaign there. So it was like a lot of the marketing stuff. Was a consultant for a little while before Maven. One of the coolest projects that I got to work on there was creating a sales dashboard for a state lottery, in the United States. Yeah. And, it was really cool because they had customized the whole state into custom counties. They had defined
Yeah.
the border. So we were using ArcGIS within Power BI to define those custom counties and building out a visual to understand sales by the counties and all that kind of stuff. So that was actually a really cool program. I got to work with their research team and their database teams there. And there was hundreds of millions of records in their database. So there was like a data scale challenge for refresh, and some really cool kind of custom visuals. So some fun stuff there. And then at Maven, beyond the courses, that I'm clearly using Power BI for, we've got kind of different business type reporting where we're looking at sale analyses, cohort analysis, churn and retention, and kind of everything in between there. So yeah, and then I had mentioned that report that created for the dev team. So, from my career, there's been a lot of stuff from marketing to operations stuff to cost related kind of finance stuff, and a little bit of everything in between.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, and for anyone interested in seeing some examples of what Power BI can do, I highly encourage you guys to check out our showcase at Maven. Check out some of our challenge entries too. I know I'm always amazed with what people can do with Power BI. It's funny you mentioned those, like shape files. I remember when we had the taxi challenge back in the day where we included the different like taxi zones for the city of New York, and people were able to incorporate that into their maps. Shout out Zoe Douglas as well, who won that challenge and then went on to work for the Microsoft team, which was pretty cool. I highly encourage you guys to check that out. Now, you've kind of already mentioned this as well, Aaron. So the other part of your job here as Maven is to work as our Power BI instructor, which means, which is a good thing, or maybe unfortunately, that you have to stay on top of the new updates that come in every month, right? It's a great thing for Power BI. It's a hard thing as a course author. Now, do you think this poses a challenge for people that are looking to learn this tool, since their skills can become outdated rather quickly? Or is it more an encouraging sign because you know that it's going to continue to be a valuable skill well into the future, just knowing how much Microsoft is putting effort into it?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of ways to kind of approach answering that. So for everybody that's kind of tuned in now that is just starting out, right? I think that there's potentially a feeling of like, oh man, there's so much to learn, right? Microsoft is continually putting out, new features. What is this whole fabric ecosystem thing about? Like, do I need to learn that before I learn Power BI? And it can feel like there's a ton to dig into. So I think the piece to really focus on here is that anyone that's looking to learn Power BI, you need to start off with the fundamentals, right? Nothing else really is going to make sense, or you're not going to grasp some of the larger concepts until you really kind of nail those fundamentals. So things like just connecting to data, how to use Power Query efficiently to kind of transform your data into usable data sets. From there, learning how to just load it into the data model, creating a properly set up, data model with those lookup tables and fact tables, or fact and dimension tables. And then from there, just learning some, pretty basic DAX functions to be able to aggregate those columns and then visualize it. I would really recommend focusing on those really kind of foundational pieces there and not even look at the rest of the ecosystem, right? A lot of times I will hear about a feature and maybe look at it quickly to kind of understand what it does, but I won't really dig into it until it comes up or I need to use it or something like that, or I think it might be useful. So even, myself, I'm not out there trying to learn absolutely everything that, comes out for every release or, every, specific nuance there. But yeah, again, just really getting good at those basics. And it's going to give you a really solid foundation that you can then, dig into whatever else you need to or want to use within Power BI. I think one of the caveats to that is, like, the more we talk about, and we'll probably get to this, the interesting piece to me really becomes is, how does AI fit into this?
Yep.
Right. And I'm sure a lot of folks are wondering that. There's a lot of opportunity for, AI to help you, write your DAX code, right? To help, figure out the best way to optimize a data model, right? To help with some Power Query M code writing, right? There's a lot of places that it can fit in there. One of the things that I still would highly recommend is that use those tools. They're great, right? I think as an analyst, you need to be comfortable using those types of AI tools, but you also need to be confident in the output and understand what it's spitting back to you, right? So again, learning those fundamentals, I don't think AI is really ever going to replace that need to just fundamentally understand how any tool works that you're using.
I love it. Yeah, anyone and the folks in the audience, let us know in the chat if you personally found any good AI use cases for Power BI that you can share. And kind of diving a little bit more into that, Aaron, I know we're talking about Microsoft, its updates, its futures, Power BI. I know now they're heavily investing in Copilot, right, and its integration with Power BI. Have you had a chance to play around with that yet? Is there anything you can tell us?
Yeah, so not for Power BI. It is pretty cost prohibitive to test it out. They don't have at least that I've seen or have heard anybody else really using any sort of like sandbox or free preview environment or anything like that. So it can be cost prohibitive to actually use those Copilot features. I think that from the feedback that I've read, it's good, at some of the basic tasks. I'm not seeing anything really that I'm getting like super excited about where it's like, oh man, it is completely solving X challenge or something like that. To be fair, or to be honest, I think that you can use ChatGPT, depending on if you're paying for, if you do the $20 a month or whatever it is to pay for some of those models, the output is potentially better than what I have read or seen, for some of the results for Copilot. That said, if you do have access to it within the Power BI ecosystem, I have heard that it's great to help out with, some data modeling tasks, some DAX measure, kind of recommendations or tasks there. So it's also still a preview feature. I think it's still technically a preview feature within Microsoft. So, it's got to evolve, right? I'm sure as they continue to gather data, continue to train it, and all that stuff, it'll only get better, but a little bit underwhelmed from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, it looks like we're seeing here in the chat. I use ChatGPT to check on DAX codes. I think that's probably the recommended piece of advice, right? And you don't need anything extra. It's funny because Copilot in Excel, I guess, is a little bit more accessible, I guess, for folks, right? You do have to pay for your Microsoft 365 subscription, which honestly I'd recommend. Microsoft doesn't pay me to say this, but I think if you use Excel all the time, get 365. They're coming out with new updates all the time. Yeah. You also got to get the Copilot Pro subscription, which is another extra like $20 a month. I've obviously have had a chance to play around with it. We have a course on Copilot out in Maven, as a matter of fact. But I do still think that right now the things it's best at is still just helping with anything that requires some sort of coding, right? Even if it's as simple as writing Excel functions. And I think Copilot is good at that in Excel. I know that they're now rolling in new features with Python and Excel where ChatGPT can start to leverage that for some data analysis, for some machine learning. I'm curious whenever I get access to that, how much it'll improve, because I think in Copilot's ability to analyze the data that it has access to in your Excel workbooks, it's still lacking and pretty much relying on old features that it has. But I'm sure Microsoft has big plans for that in the future, and these things will just continue to grow and get better every day.
Yeah, I hope so. And a little bit more broadly, like I think that AI, these LLMs, and a lot of the products that are continuing to be put out there and they're evolving. I think it's transforming the way that we're interacting with BI tools, or it'll continue to interact or continue to transform the way that we're interacting with BI tools. I was thinking of like a use case, right? Where, there's a lot of, virtual headsets, that are starting to come out. So I'm like, as an analyst, you sit down at your computer and you put on your augmented reality or VR headset, and you're using voice prompting to talk about like, hey, I want to solve this type of a business problem. I have my data model, set up over here, or I've got my raw data set up, in this storage area. I want to make sure that it's formatted to accomplish these three things. Can you help me create a well-structured data model in Power BI and then create measures for these three areas? Like, I can very much see a situation in the next handful of years where that is a reality, right? Where that's your kind of workflow as an analyst. Yeah. And again, it's like these models are really I really think that they're just going to get that much better at, tuning and optimizing complex models. There's so much content out there where people are really pushing the boundaries of what, AI can do, especially within Power BI. That it's only a matter of, probably a few years at the pace of which, a lot of the AI tools and tech is accelerating, that's going to become, more of a reality than not. But I say that also in a way where, as a user of any sort of BI tool, Power BI or Tableau or Domo or, whatever you end up using, you still need to understand those basics of how things are structured and, that kind of stuff. So I don't really think those kind of core, skill sets, are going to be going away.
Yeah. So, and that kind of brings me to my next question. I feel like in the past, or at least to me, like once you mastered those fundamentals, like the next step in becoming a Power BI expert was DAX, right? DAX is this gigantic world that you can dive into. But now that AI is kind of starting to help bridge those gaps, what do you think are still some of the most valuable or underrated Power BI skills that people in the audience might want to focus on?
Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, I'm going to kind of stick with my answer so far is get good at the basics, right? Yep. Understanding the basics of data structures and how tables relate to each other. Like if you're trying to create a model and you don't understand what, primary and foreign keys and tables are, and you don't have to know like the most complex, kind of data modeling, scenarios or solutions or things like that. I don't think, but, understanding how to create a well-structured data model and what that means and, what a normalized model is, like that stuff's super important. And especially in Power BI, that model feeds everything else. If you have a very poorly structured model, your DAX is hard / impossible, right? It doesn't, you're going to see inaccurate or just straight up wrong answers and visuals and that kind of stuff. So I think from a technical standpoint, making sure that you're really good at the basics and you've got that strong foundation, I think that's going to continue to be critical. The other side of this is really just great critical thinking and communication skills, right? That is never going to become obsolete, right? So continuing to hone those skills as an analyst, I think this is going to become especially important as AI continues to evolve, to make sure that you are just, as a human, that you're really heavily integrated into what's actually happening within the tool, right? ChatGPT, AI, whatever the tools are, those can certainly help you out with a lot of the technical pieces. But then, the real value as an analyst is, sharing those insights, making those recommendations, helping to optimize the business, thinking critically and logically about that stuff, and then communicating that to other stakeholders, right? Those skills aren't going to go away.
Yep. Yeah, I love it. And my next question was actually going to be on, if people are just starting out, where would you recommend they start? It sounds like you've already covered that, master the fundamentals, connecting to data, modeling, DAX, visualizations. But for those other pieces, for those communication skills, for those critical thinking skills, where do you think beyond learning the technical skills, they should go to maybe practice or flex those muscles as well? Any recommendations there?
Yeah. So one other piece to kind of highlight a little bit more is the data visualization piece. Yeah. Right. I think that is that's one of my weaker areas, so, admittedly, I know you've got a great course on, dashboard design, and you talk about a lot of the different ways that you are best practices to just set up and lay out the report and the types of, attributes to use in color and, how to clearly communicate. communication isn't just verbal, right? It's also from a visual standpoint. So when you start talking about practicing things, I think practicing that the visual communication, of what you're trying to relate, along with the verbal component, I think that's extremely important. And we've got Maven has a bunch of different ways that you can practice that, right? We've got a lot of free data sets on the site. I think finding real world examples of or data sets of problems that you want to try to tackle or solve, it's a great way to practice those skill sets. Build out a report using that data set that mimics some sort of real world scenario, and then publish that to a project portfolio, and then you can share that with folks. So you're kind of doing a round trip on that, working with a free data set, and you're practicing all those different skill sets. And you can do a really nice write-up, or maybe do an accompanying video to kind of talk about the insights or recommendations from your analyses. And that does a lot, right? If you're just new and starting out, it's going to help define and bolster those skill sets. If maybe you're a little bit more comfortable developing in Power BI, it's going to help with the communication standpoint. It's also going to help build that portfolio of projects that, if you're looking to get a new job, it's going to help support that. Maybe you just want to show something to your boss. You're like, oh, hey, I built this over the weekend. Like, it was just, a super fun project. We've had some other students or people involved with Maven that have done that at their current company, and it has helped get them promoted or new opportunities within the company, by participating in that kind of stuff. So I really think it's about practice, right? And making sure that you're finding ways to practice, some of those technical skills along with the communication pieces.
I love it. And I'm actually just seeing a question here in the chat where it says, how relevant is the Power BI certification? Do you think that, as you learn Power BI, going through those steps and completing your certification at the end kind of helps kind of mark the steps in your journey and solidify it at the end? Or what's your opinion on that certification?
So I've got a couple of thoughts on this. So I think that the Microsoft certification is a great public facing acknowledgement that you have been able to study for a challenging test and pass it. Yeah. I think the PL 300 is challenging. With that said, I also don't think that the PL 300 necessarily tests the skill set of a Power BI developer in the way that they would tend to use it on the job. Yeah. Right. So I definitely think it's relevant because it is the Microsoft certified certification for Power BI. So if you're looking to get a job and potentially that's a requirement, I think it's great. But again, it shows that you were able to kind of study for a challenging exam and learn the material well enough to go through and pass it. So I think there is a lot of value there. But where the exam kind of falls flat for me is I don't really think that it follows the kind of typical development path, or what I would consider, the kind of core skills needed to develop a Power BI solution, for a business.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that's a great segue now into our audience Q&A. I know I read that question from the chat. For anyone dropping questions in the chat, please remember to drop them in the questions tab. That's where we're going to be focusing on to address these questions. So if you have any that are still lingering in there, remember to drop those in there. Aaron, I'll let you start taking a look at those.
So we have this kind of first question here. What's the general structure of the Power BI interview for a data analyst position? So one of the things that I used to do as a hiring, as a manager of an analytics team, was I first care about the fit, right? We've talked a lot about this at Maven. I care about the personality and the fit, right? I think to a certain extent, you can absolutely teach technical skills. You can teach people how to use a tool. So first and foremost, when any interview, specifically for, data analyst positions, I'm really looking for a good fit there. And again, I go back to critical thinking skills. I look for folks that are, naturally inquisitive. They're asking questions, that kind of stuff. Those are more important to me at a certain point than really just thinking about technical skills. So I really try to assess that kind of stuff first. Beyond that, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a take-home test, for folks. So depending on if it's a we'll call it like an entry analyst position or somebody that's a little bit more senior. In entry analyst position, it was typically a single table. And there was a couple of questions that I would ask, like, hey, how much was, gross revenue for this product in, January of, 2018 or something like that, right? So do you know how to kind of import the data? And you're kind of assessing basic skills there and the ability to dig into the data. And then for something like a more of a senior analyst position, it'd start to look at a multi-table model. Do they understand how to define relationships between the tables? Those primary and foreign keys. Are they able to create measures? There's potentially more of a data visualization component where it was like, build out a little bit of a dashboard, maybe with some KPI cards, some trending visuals, things like that. So again, I really think that the one of the biggest areas to hit, if you're both interviewing people and preparing for the interview, is to make sure that it's a good fit. And that works both ways.
I love it.
Enrique, anything you'd add there?
No, I think you covered all the key points that I'd be looking for as well.
Nice.
Let's see, what else do we have here?
There's a couple here about the PL300. Kind of talked about that, I think, already.
This one here. So best recommendations to access Power BI service when not affiliated with a work email, which I know can be a barrier for entry.
Yeah. I'm going to upvote this one 100 times as well. So that's one of the more challenging pieces. So one of the challenges there, for folks that aren't aware, is that if you are trying to create an account with Power BI service, or you're trying to sign in to Power BI Desktop that requires a Power BI service account, it doesn't support signing up with domains like at Gmail or Outlook or Hotmail or any other kind of telecom style email addresses. So it has to be either a business account or a school or a university account. The reason for that is a little bit more complex. It has to do with the architecture of how Power BI service is set up into these tenants. But what we've done, so you can create a free account with Maven Analytics, and there is an option if you head up to your individual profile. There's an option there to create an account basically with Maven. So you'll get a @Maven BI email address, and you can use that to sign up for a free 60-day trial of Power BI service. So we're offering that as a way to kind of help folks understand the service for people that don't have a work or a school account that'll work. So that's the best way to do that. If you have any questions about that, reach out to us. Be happy to help you out if you're having any issues or challenges getting that set up.
What happens once the 60-day trial ends?
Yeah, so you still have the 60-day trial is only for their kind of paid features, all of the premium offering stuff. You get access to all the Fabric ecosystem pieces, or a lot of them anyway. And there's some other. Microsoft has changed the way that they talk about the paid tiers. It was Pro and then Premium per user, and now it's like a Fabric trial or all this stuff. So end state is that you lose access to a lot of those more premium features, but you'll always have access to Power BI service, and you have access to something called your workspace. And that's really just a personal workspace that you can publish your own reports and dashboards to and all that kind of stuff. So you'll still have access to that after the trial ends. And then if you wanted to, you could purchase a paid license. I think there's a couple of options. One's $10 a month, the other is $20 a month. So depending on your situation, that's something that you might want to take advantage of.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. What
Um,
about, let's see. Who are your favorite YouTubers or resources, I guess, online for Power BI? Why?
hmm.
We can get into the second part of the question later, I guess.
Yeah, so there are favorite YouTubers. Um, so a couple of people that I really like and have been consuming a lot of their stuff lately. Brian Julius. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he does an amazing job on LinkedIn. He has very, very in-depth posts about Power BI and technology, and all that kind of stuff. He's always sharing content. He is a super smart guy, and I've been really loving his content a lot. There's another guy, Greg Deckler. He can. He's got a great personality, but he's got some very strong opinions on some of the downfalls of Power BI, and he's critical about DAX and some of the functionality and stuff there. I really like his work for a few reasons, because he's really pushing on the idea of just accept this because it's the way it is, and I think he's really trying to push development, of the tool in a way that just makes sense, right? Like, I don't want to have to worry about, all of these different conditions when I'm trying to use the calculate function, right? Greg's a great one to look at his content. For Power Query specific stuff, Rick DeGroot, he's a great resource. Microsoft MVP. He's got a ton of amazing Power Query content. So he's another one that I really like to consume his content.
Awesome. And then it says, what's the most awesome dashboard you've ever built? I'll change it slightly. What's the most awesome dashboard you've ever seen?
So no, I'm gonna stick with it as is. So that we built. So Chris Dutton and I, we were working at the same marketing company together, or the same agency together, and the analytics team that we were running. He was the director of the team at the time. I was the manager. We decided to create this group called Analytics Anonymous. And what we did each week is somebody brought in a new beer, and we had it like blinded, and we would do a testing. And of course, being analysts, we had to create a data set based on it. So we had all of these different criteria and like a rubric each week that we would rank, the different beers and stuff on. And we created a Power BI dashboard based on that. And it was fully interactive. You could drill into the different users on the team to see their preferences. You could drill into the different types of, beers and all that kind of stuff. But what it did beyond that was we actually used it for new business pitches for the analytics team.
Nice.
So it was a good way to showcase like not only our skill sets, but kind of the personality of the team. And it instead of trying to show like this, here's this great like e-commerce dashboard kind of stuff, it was a really fun way to kind of show off, what the team could do and the personality of the team. So that was one of the most fun, dashboards and, that we've created.
I love that you mentioned that, because it feels like we always go back to those, like, I know we talked about this last week with Chris Brule and Alice, where it's always those passion projects, right? And sometimes people kind of shy away from them because they think that everything that they do needs to be professional. But even the fact that you use that to present, in a business context, I think it's awesome. And it's the best way to practice because it's about something you're enthusiastic about. It's funny because I was thinking about some of my favorite dashboards, and there was one that I built for my, I guess, then girlfriend for our 1 year anniversary, now my wife. And I had to build this dashboard, it had like our locations where we were and like the different places we went. And then there were these tooltips that I wanted to add where you'd hover over and it'd be an image of that day or that place. And I ended up having to go through this YouTube, funnel and had to use some like complex M code and DAX and ended up getting them to render. So that was always very excited. And again, something that was really just me trying to pursue something as a passion project that led me to build something. And I actually was able to publish it and share it to her because of the Maven BI, Power BI service account.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And like, that's how you learn stuff. So like going back to my point earlier about like a lot of the different, features that are being released and stuff like that, working on those types of passion projects, or noodling around with something in the evenings at, after work or weekend, like whenever you have time, like that's a great time to try to explore those different features and functionality, and better understand what they can and can't do, or how they should or shouldn't be used. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Like this one here, so Enrique, I'm going to actually ask you this one. So, because you have used both, do you think that, it's kind of mandatory, or that you should learn Excel before Power BI? And we'll kind of say not even before Power BI, but before other, kind of more robust, BI tools.
I don't think it's mandatory. I do think it's inevitable, though, right? I think anyone that eventually ends up using Power BI showed interest in data at some point. And I think if you did that, you just started with Excel.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why your path was that way. That's why my path was that way. I will say that it does help you. When I used to work as an analyst with just using Excel as well. Then my first course that I took from Mavens, actually, but before I was working here, I was a student. I took Chris's Power Query course, right? And that kind of helped me, like, honestly revolutionize the way I worked with my data back then. And this was right around the time that Power BI was getting started too. So I remember eagerly waiting for Chris to drop his Power BI desktop course, because I was transitioning from Excel and from my Excel models into trying to build Power BI solutions for the company that I was working with. So I don't think it's mandatory. I do think it helps, but I think you're going to take that path anyway. So
yeah, very similar response. I think, again, like the accessibility of a tool like Excel, you can really start to understand, like, oh, this is what a table is. Right? You can start looking at and saying, like, oh, this column, all of the values in it are unique. Like, what does that mean? And it's a very tangible way to start to understand, like, oh, I got unique values in this column. Maybe that's my primary key for this table, right? And it's, it's like, I know that's a, maybe a simplistic response, but again, it's a very easy way to start understanding, like, the shape and structure and stuff of data, and a lot of those kind of common topics, pivoting, unpivoting data that you tend to run into using tools like Power BI.
Yeah. I've actually got a similar one for you here,
okay.
Which says, for someone who already has good knowledge of other AI tools like Tableau, which I know you started with before Power BI, how long should it take optimistically to make that transition and become proficient in Power BI?
Yeah, so it might take a little bit, to be completely honest. Tableau, when I transitioned from Tableau into Power BI, it was different enough that you had to fundamentally learn some of those, or relearn, or how to apply some of those concepts in Power BI, right? So Tableau, using like the data prep tools, it was all about joining data sets right together. And Power BI, it was all about creating a relational data model, right, and connecting those primary and foreign keys together within the tables. So as a concept, you're kind of doing the same thing, where you're combining tables. The method in which you're doing it is different, though. You're not joining the tables like a merge or append, like left, right joins, things like that. So you're kind of fundamentally learning that a little bit differently. The other challenging piece is when you start getting into more advanced DAX functions. I think the easiest thing to compare to some of the more complex stuff in DAX, like the calculate function, it's similar-ish to the level of detail calcs within Tableau. So you do have some ways that you can say, like, oh, hey, this is similar to this in another tool like Tableau. So there are some pieces where it might take a little bit longer to kind of understand, whatever the context is behind a value that you're seeing, why it's calculated that way. But again, a lot of the concepts they translate well between tools. So whether it's, Tableau or Domo or, Looker, or like, whatever other tool you're using, having that kind of foundational understanding of those data structures and the way things need to be set up in order to return those aggregated values in a visual, they very much apply tool to tool.
Love it. Aaron, thank you for your time. Looks like it's up right now. So thanks everyone for joining. Had a ton of fun. I hope you did too.
Thanks everyone.